Strumpf is finished. President Garfield has polished off his last tray of lasagna as a free man. He is going to die in prison, as we have been told by the Russiagators. For lo, these past 7, 8, 10 years, it feels like an eternity that we've been told. Trump is going to be arrested. The Marshal of the Supreme Court has issued an indictment. He's coming for him. He's got his gun. He's got his badge. He's going to be knocking down the Orange Man's door, hauling him away to Rikers Island. All these tales for all these years that have never come to fruition. Could this finally be the moment when he is shut away for good? Well, according to the Orange Man himself, that's quite the possibility. Because you see, a third, count them, 3 indictments are expected to be brought against him, with a possible 4th one coming out of Atlanta. So there's one in New York, one in Miami, now a 3rd one coming out of D.C., and then potentially a 4th one in Atlanta. Now, the D.C. one, that is what we've been waiting for. That is the most damning. I wasn't the first to say this, but, I think most people understand, hey, if there's anywhere in the country that is going to throw Trump in prison, regardless of the evidence, yes, Manhattan is bad. D.C. probably even worse. Because while Manhattan, sure, it's full of rich Democrats who just hate Trump, D.C. is full of the deep state. It's essentially, you've got a jury of the CIA. That's who's going to be judging Trump. That's who's going to be deciding his guilt in a case regarding the January 6th insurrection. Trump, the leader of the insurrection, is probably going to be charged with seditious conspiracy, or maybe just straight up sedition. But I would guess seditious conspiracy, that's what they charged Stewart Rhodes with. And let's just say it's easier to make that case against Trump. I mean, you can't really make the case against either of them, but I mean, if you're going to do it with Stewart Rhodes, I think they can easily make the same case against Trump. As we've seen in all the January 6th cases, none of these people were granted bail, down to like the lowest so-called offender, little grandmas who happened to who stayed inside the velvet ropes, people who never broke any windows, who never, who had very friendly interactions with the police, who were let in by the police, all jailed without bail, never allowed to see their families, beaten mercilessly by prison guards, losing all sense and connection with humanity inside of the D.C. gulag. That's the precedent that they've set with these January 6th cases. Now, after being that harsh on the lowest level so-called offenders, can you really expect them to grant bail to the President of the United States, the so-called ringleader of this insurrection? I mean, this is the big cheese who they've been trying to get. This is the guy who they've been building up to. Why would they not throw the book at him if they're going to, with taking cooperating so-called offenders, people who are saying, I'll say whatever you want, I'll admit to anything, because that's what the public defenders tell them to do, because the public defenders, hate the January 6th, there's probably even more than the prosecutors. So the public defenders said, no bargains, just admit to whatever they want, and no, you're not going to get a reduced sentence. we just want you to prostrate yourself before the judge. After doing that to all those people, how could they just let Trump out? I mean, it's not logical. Not that any of this is logical. But trying to think from their perspective, I just don't see them. I don't see why they would do it. It makes the most sense to detain Trump pre-trial, just like all these other people. If you didn't give any of them bail, don't give Trump bail. It seems to be that simple. I mean, the other people didn't even have a way of paying bail. Trump, no matter what his bail they set, Trump can make his bail. He's going to get out if they grant him bail at all. So Trump may be forced to run for president from the D.C. gulag. And once he's inevitably convicted of whatever it is they decide to charge him with, after all, a D.C. jury, as we've seen with all the other January 6th cases, they're going to convict on whatever charge is brought to them. These people, more than anyone else in the world, want to get Trump and any of his supporters that they can get their hands on. And so certainly, you would think, Trump will be convicted. I mean, I said this in the Manhattan case. It's times 10 in the D.C. case. This isn't about Stormy Daniels. This is about January 6th, the attack on our democracy, our sacred democracy, the sacred temple of democracy, the House of Representatives. And so these people, with great righteousness and furious anger, will strike down any who seek to destroy their beloved institutions. Then, once Trump is convicted of seditious conspiracy and whatever else they decide to lay on him, they will use the 19th Amendment to strike him from the ballot in all the swing states, and of course all the blue states. Now, in all the blue states, it doesn't matter. California and New York want to take Trump off the ballot so that nobody can vote for him. So be it. It's not going to make a difference. We know how those states are going to vote. Illinois doesn't. It doesn't matter. What starts to matter is when Georgia and Arizona and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan, when all those states strike Trump off the ballot, which I think is quite possible if we have all these, if all these conditions are met, then there's no way for Trump to win the Electoral College. They will have engineered it so that he's only on the ballot, so that even if he wins every state in which he's on the ballot, he can't be president. And they call this democracy, but this is the plan. This is the direction they're going in. Now, do I think that's smart? No. Do I think that literally, openly rigging an election, removing someone from the ballot, Brazil style? I mean, this is like what they did with what's his name? Lula. This is exactly what they did with Lula a few years ago. And then Lula came back and, decided to bow before the gods of Washington and the Western establishment. And now he's in their good graces. So because they decided, oh my gosh, we got rid of Lula, and then we got Bolsonaro, he's even worse. And so Lula said, hey, I'm not so bad now, am I? And they're like, okay, fine, come in, you have to behave yourself, Lula. And so now Lula is in their good graces. They let him out, and now it's Bolsonaro who is in exile in Orlando, I think. I think that's where Bolsonaro lives now. They've now banned him from running for president. And so, I mean, we're no better than Brazil at this point, which, hey, I like Brazil. But obviously, I think the people in Brazil would admit we've got our things together a little. Up until now, America been a better place to live overall. More opportunity here, generally more wealth. We don't have as much extreme poverty, and our elections tend to be a little more reliable. Brazil, as recently as the late 80s, was a military dictatorship that was sponsored by the CIA, of course. I'm not saying that, hey, Brazil, you're stupid. Why don't you be more like America? Obviously, Brazil is in the position it's in largely because of American intervention. So I'm not trying to act high and mighty here. I'm speaking on a purely what's the opposite of normative? Positive. Oh my gosh, I was forgetting things. I was thinking like relative. No, not relative. In a positive sense. So things are not going well here in America. I think if we have an election that is decided by an incredibly partisan prosecutor and judge and jury, where you have all these cases. I mean, is it just a coincidence Trump committed all these crimes in all these different states? Like right now, right before, is it a coincidence? I don't think so. It seems a little more like they're trying to throw the kitchen sink at him. I think that's how it would appear to most potential Trump voters. It doesn't matter if people who are already voting for Biden support this, by the way. If the people who would have voted for Trump look at this, and they say, gee, there was no chance for our guy to win because the system decided that he would not be allowed to be president, whether we voted for him or not. That's going to undermine people's confidence in, what is that word again? Oh, yeah, democracy. It's almost as if democracy means doing whatever the CIA tells you to do. Which, coincidentally, that's what the word has meant since the founding of the CIA. Whenever our government talks about democracy, making the world safe for democracy, they're talking about following the instruction set laid out by their CIA handlers. And so when a president steps out of line and says, you know what, maybe we should have peace with Russia, and maybe we should treat the Chinese like business partners instead of, or business competitors rather than, geopolitical rivals. You know, we're not trying to compete with China to dominate the rest of Asia. We're trying to compete with China in business. That's a much healthier approach. And I had a big problem, I was very critical of Trump's approach towards China. But clearly, the problem was that he was, as far as the regime is concerned, he was not anti-China enough. He was obviously not anti-Russia enough. Despite the fact that he gave lethal aid to Ukraine, something I was very critical of. But anyway, this reminds me very much of the Tate prosecution. You never heard anything bad, really, about Andrew Tate, even though he was always the same person, until he started criticizing the Ukraine war. Then they decided, oh my gosh, we got to throw this guy in prison, shut him up. That seems very telling to me. As soon as this guy criticizes Zelensky, now all of a sudden, oh my gosh, he's a menace to society, and the British and American embassies are mum on his prosecution in Romania, a place that's known for its very squeaky clean judicial and criminal justice system. And so the Trump persecutions are no different. This is just how the regime deals with its dissidents now, even domestically. And not, it's not even the far fringe anymore. This isn't Lyndon LaRouche. This is the opposition. But I guess for most American history, which only going back to 1945, that's when modern America was born. You can't look at the America of the 1920s, the teens, the 19th century, the 18th century. That was a different country entirely. I mean, hell, I say 2005 was a different country. But I want to think in terms of historical eras. Back to 1945, that was the birth of modern America. And ever since then, we've had a controlled opposition. We had, what was his name, Senator Taft from Ohio, I think was like the last old right president. I mean, we used to call it, it's called the old right, because before the war, the right was very different. The right was much more like, Donald Trump. And then magically after World War II, there was this CIA operative who founded a magazine called The National Review, which decided and set the parameters for conservative thought for the next, 60 years? 70? I guess it was close to 70. Well, it was founded in the 50s, so let's say 60 years. Going up until 2016, 2015. Up until then, the National Review decided what you were allowed and not allowed to say as a conservative. Anyone who went against the grain, who went against the CIA operatives' agenda, they were excommunicated. And ever since 2015, 2016, National Review has been irrelevant. They were made irrelevant by Trump. And now all of a sudden, look what the right has turned into. It's very interesting. Now the right is no longer in line with the CIA's agenda. Now that CIA-founded publication has been thrown to the dustbin of history. It's almost as if the opposition in America is no longer controlled. And so, what are they trying to achieve here? Are they just trying to stamp out all opposition, or are they trying to regain control of the opposition? Because this is not the way to regain control. This is a very reckless move. This risks just turning the opposition against the regime entirely. at least, let's say, 30 to 40% of America, if you just remove Trump from the ballot, they are never going to look at our elections as fair again. They're going to look at our elections for what they are, a sham. You can't have a country the size of America with fair elections. It wouldn't be able to sustain itself. They have to be very controlled pursuits. So, anyway, I think this is getting too long. I have much more to say on this, and I will say it in the coming days. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.